Good evening and welcome. We are SVCE Clean Energy. So what better way to kick it off by getting a solar installer to give you the first few words. He also happens to be the chair of our board. Mr. George Tyson, please come up.
Thank you and welcome everybody. We're so glad to see you all here. We have an exciting afternoon of wonderful speakers, and I know you can't wait to get to hear from them. And I just want to share with you how pleased we are with the success of Silicon Valley Clean Energy over the years. And at your seat, you will find our impact report. And it details some of the major investments we made over the last several years that will have lasting impact on Silicon Valley Clean Energy, our communities, and everybody here. And so with that, while speaking of investments, I got to tell you something. You know, I'm a chemical engineer by training, and my master's thesis was developing a solar energy storage chemical process, and nothing ever came from it. And years after, I would look back and say, oh, that was so 1979. But look at us now today. It's 2023. We're building stuff. We're plugging it in. And so I know you want to hear more, and so I'm going to hand it back to Girish, and welcome again.
Great. Thank you, Chair Tyson. First, a couple of housekeeping things. When you want to ask questions, we have a mic right there. So please go to the mic, stand there to take questions, and that's how we'll deal with that. Restrooms are back there. We have some refreshments in the lobby. Feel free to step out to sample those. And then we have a buffet dinner that will open at 5:30 and close at 6:30, so that we can break down this room and start our board meeting at 7 p.m. We will have a jazz group playing there from the West Valley Community College, so we're very happy to have them. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker this evening, Panama Bartholomy. We welcomed Panama here several years ago to talk to the board. It was a very memorable talk, and we actually recorded it and provided it to board members here. So he is the founder of the Building Decarbonization Coalition. He previously was European Director of the Investor Confidence Project on behalf of the Environmental Defense Fund, and has worked for the California Legislature, the Energy Commission, the State Architect, the Conservation Corps. He's worked on climate solutions in over 30 countries, presented at and collaborated on products from the United Nations, the International Energy Agency, and the European Commission. Panama, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
It's 4 o'clock. Pre-happy hour, I understand. Oh, Girish. I was so sad to hear about Girish's retirement. Really, really sad. He told me, though, don't worry, he's not going far. He'll continue to do work in this space. So I will say, as sad as I am, Girish, it's good to hear that you're going to be making even more money and working less time and still being able to work with us on this. So congratulations on your retirement, and thank you for your service to this community. I did get out on a ledge on that phone call, and it was only when he told me about Monica taking over that I got down off that ledge. And so I know that the community's in great hands with Monica. Well, thank you so much for having me. I drove down here from Petaluma today. And as I was driving down, it really struck me 2 big reasons why I was happy that I'm here. Number one, you know, I'm a traditionalist, and it's a great time of year to come together to have a conversation like this. Being a traditionalist, I love to spend time with friends around poinsettias and electric fireplaces. and be able to have conversations around building decarbonization. I love the holidays because it's a great time to pause and reflect and celebrate what we've done together. And we have a lot to celebrate. This year will be the second straight year that heat pumps outsell gas furnaces across the United States in every month of the year. Heat pumps are the top performing technology in the HVAC space, better than air conditioners, better than gas furnaces, better than oil boilers across the entire United States. 1 in 4 Americans now lives in a jurisdiction that's adopted a building decarbonization policy, as over 100 communities across America have adopted building decarbonization policies now. Whole states are moving forward on building decarbonization. The state of New York, the state of Washington, and I think this year the state of California will join them in saying no more gas in new buildings. We have to stop digging the hole any deeper and moving forward towards our clean energy future, starting with our building sector. Last year, 120 different pieces of building decarbonization legislation was introduced in state legislatures around the country, just showing the groundswell of activity, not just in California or New York, but in states really across the country on this. There are proceedings in 12 different public utilities commissions around the country about the future of gas, starting to craft a narrative and then a regulatory structure to wind down the gas system in those states. And just last week, Massachusetts jumped into the lead on this, adopting a groundbreaking decision, putting in place with certainty that the future of the Massachusetts gas system is going to be winding it down, not expanding it, and starting to work on neighborhood scale approaches to building electrification and getting buildings off of natural gas. Here in California, the state of California back in October signed a major new partnership with all of the OEMs for heat pump manufacturers, water heater manufacturers, in order to help reach the governor's goal of 6 million heat pumps. And then our very own Bay Area Air Quality Management District earlier this year, adopting a first in the nation regulations to phase out the sale of gas water heaters and gas furnaces across the entire 9-county Bay Area region. Thanks to Stovegate at the beginning of the year and all the attention around the potential banning of gas stoves at the federal level, searches for induction cooking are through the roof. And you can say, whether that was good or bad, that whole experience, but what I know is there are now millions of Americans that now have this sticky idea in their head that potentially gas stoves are not healthy for their family and they need to start looking for alternatives. And those are the kind of sticky things that don't leave your head when you're thinking about your family and making purchases. So there's a lot to be happy about and to celebrate, and I'll say all of this is before the Inflation Reduction Act showers billions of dollars down on our communities to accelerate this activity even further. And so I welcome the opportunity to come and reflect and celebrate all these things that we've done together. But the second reason why I'm really happy to be here today, right now, is because everything I just mentioned is all because of you. If you look at where this movement started, it started right here in Silicon Valley. Yes, Berkeley gets a lot of credit for being the first city to jump up and run out in front, but it wasn't until the inspired leadership of community members, organizations, city councils, staff, and the support of Silicon Valley Clean Energy that we had a number of cities moving forward with leadership standards here in Silicon Valley. And it's these standards that truly started this movement across this country and has allowed us to accomplish all of those numbers and facts and figures that I just mentioned. And so I'm excited to be here because it's a chance for us to come and reflect on this first stage of building decarbonization and the leadership that you all have provided to all of us, and to thank you for that leadership. And so it's no shock at all to me that you send the type of representatives to Sacramento that you send. Representatives that share the same sense of urgency around climate change and building decarbonization, and seek out the type of leadership standards that we need in order to meet our goals. And so where are we right now? Girish wanted me to talk about this moment that we find ourselves in. Everything that I just talked about is what we've done together, what has happened over the last 6 or 7 years. And we call this at the Coalition the first phase of building decarbonization. And we are clearly moving into the next phase. The first phase is really characterized by low awareness, low availability of product, no policies, no programs, hard to do. We're clearly now moving into the next phase of building decarbonization. And what this will require from us is really learning about where we've been, adjusting by lessons learned about successes and failures that we've seen, and doing everything so much faster than what we've done in the last 6 or 7 years if we're to accomplish our goals. There's some excellent work by Dr. Emily Grubert and Dr. Sarah Hastings-Simons that I highly recommend. If you just Google the term mid-transition, their work will come up. But I think it really encapsulates where we're at this moment. And they characterize this really calling it the mid-transition. We are operating and at the same time seeking to wind down a fossil fuel-based system, while at the same moment trying to create and wind up a zero carbon system. We're doing this within regulatory structures, economic structures, social structures, and physical infrastructure that is not designed for either one of those situations and not designed to deal with the impacts of climate change. I don't know if this definition helps any of you in any of your work, but perhaps it explains some of the anxiety you might feel as you try to address this moment that we're in. This is one of the hardest moments for leadership right now. This is not the last mile. This is not the first mile. We are clearly on the journey now, and this requires a different type of leadership than the leadership of just taking that first step. So what the good doctors recommend is the need for comprehensive planning on the wind down of the fossil system, the wind up of the zero carbon system, and cross-planning to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind in this process and we're avoiding as much harm as we can get to. And so I'll talk now about what that means for building decarbonization. First of all, we have to optimize the current market model and the current system for the deployment of building decarbonization. To do this, we're going to need big carrots and big sticks to get this done. The big carrots are the things that we're going to do to support our communities, to make building electrification cheaper to buy and cheaper to operate. But it's also critically, particularly at the local level, about how do we support the installers? How do we support the small mom and pop businesses within our communities that are going to be the heartbeat of the building decarbonization community? They're going to be the ones that sell these products to customers. They're going to be the ones that explain all these programs and why this is happening. And so how can we support them to be able to become the messengers for this movement? The biggest need for support going forward is going to be that around low-income households, and to be able to support them and their efforts to make this transition as well. It's not just funding to be able to help with the technology, but quite often all the adjacent technologies around the installation of heat pump water heaters, induction stoves, and the remediation that it takes in their homes. The second side on the sticks, and it's what our manufacturing members talk about all the time, is a need for regulatory certainty. All of the manufacturers of heating and water heating equipment in the country are members of our coalition. They have never opposed a single building decarbonization measure in this country, even though they're the ones that manufacture the very products that we're seeking to eliminate from these policies. They support this movement. What they're looking for is certainty. And we joke with them all the time that, manufacturers are just like the rest of us. They just want TLC, transparency, longevity, consistency from policymakers. That's what they're looking for. They want to be able to make a bet on the future. They want to be able to get information from policymakers to be able to make changes within their manufacturing lines so they can provide us with the products we need to make this transition work. And so the biggest thing that we can provide are phase-out dates. What are the date certains that we'll no longer allow the sale of fossil fuel appliances within our communities? And I got to tell you, the entire country is watching BACMUD right now. What BACMUD adopted back in March, these standards, and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to craft, the entire country is watching this. We had a meeting in Washington, D.C. in November with all of the manufacturers. Easily a quarter of the conversation of these international companies was on our little air district right here and how we can support that air district in getting this work done. This work at BACMUD is not only important for California's efforts, but because they put it in their federal filing for the Clean Air Act to the EPA, that act has become now a precedent that can be used in any air district across America to be able to reduce nitrogen oxides and other pollution. And so it has become a model not only to be able to follow, but a regulatory model to be able to enforce across this country now. BACMUD has to succeed. And I am so pleased that Girish and the team at Silicon Valley Clean Energy has taken a leadership role about convening all of the Bay Area CCAs to be able to come together to be able to support BACMUD in this effort to craft a plan and provide the resources to get this done. BACMUD cannot fail if we're to accomplish our goals. That's the first step, optimizing the current market model. But we also have to recognize that the current market model is not one that is built around the values that we share on climate change. The current market model around HVAC installations and plumbing installations doesn't share our urgency on climate change. They don't share our values on equity quite often. And they're not concerned about ratepayer protection and the impacts on ratepayers from these challenges. And so increasingly, we're seeing that we're going to need a new adjacent business model that serves as a climate equity and ratepayer backstop to the current market model of HVAC and plumbing installations. And just to go into some more detail on this, when you look at the current market model of plumbers and HVAC installers replacing your HVAC system, your furnace or your water heater when it fails, if we're going to be relying upon every individual purchase decision for our climate plans, we're putting to consumers millions of consumer choices about whether or not we're ever going to be able to turn off natural gas to those neighborhoods. If any one of those decisions goes the wrong way for us, that means that the natural gas pipeline to that neighborhood has to stay in place until that single appliance is turned off. And relying upon all of these choices for our climate planning is just impossible if we're actually going to be able to meet our climate goals. Relying upon the current market model to solve our climate goals is not fair at all to low-income communities. You think about the types of investments that low-income households have to make just to be able to put in heat pumps or heat pump water heaters. The electric rates that we currently have in California and what that means for them, we have to have a different market model that takes some of the pressure off of low-income households to be able to take part in the clean energy transition. Much of the opposition to building decarbonization at the state level does come from unions, the state building trades, and others that are afraid of losing their jobs in this movement. The reason being is they're concerned about climate change, but they're concerned about losing their jobs. They're concerned about not seeing anybody building a future for building decarbonization with their workers having a vision for a place in this movement. And so if we're ever going to be able to get to the scale of investment that we actually need to fight climate change, we have to be building a building decarbonization future with union labor in mind in this process. And then lastly, the type of building decarbonization we're building right now may be the most expensive possible approach to building decarbonization we can build. We are having to gold plate our gas system as we're trying to build out a new electric system to be able to support all these loads at the same time, up until the very last moment that we turn off that gas system. That's an incredibly expensive proposition for reaching our building decarbonization goals. it represents a disorganized approach, a non-planned approach to building decarbonization. And so increasingly what we're going to have to work on together is more of an industrial scale approach to building decarbonization, a utility-led, a local power provider-led approach to neighborhood scale building electrification. An approach where PG&E and Silicon Valley Clean Energy can look at all of the gas pipeline replacements coming up within their service territory. Right now, when we replace a piece of gas pipeline, it's $4 to $6 million a mile to replace that gas pipeline. And could Silicon Valley Clean Energy and the communities that it represents and PG&E instead identify some of those pipelines and invest that $4 to $6 million a mile into the electrification of all of the buildings on that gas pipeline and shut down that gas pipeline? This approach allows us to actually use union labor. It welcomes in the scale of types of projects that brings unions in and allows them to see a future for themselves and be able to support the policies necessary to bring this about. It allows for real climate planning because you can actually have an organized plan for how you take whole neighborhoods off the gas grid. It allows for bulk purchasing to lower costs and large-scale customer acquisition. This is the kind of alternative business model, an adjacent business model that we're going to have to create. And I have to compliment Girish and his team because they've recognized this for over 2 years now and been working to figure out how do we bring this neighborhood scale market model into being. Just yesterday, our organization released a white paper on neighborhood scale electrification, and I would welcome you all to take a look at it. And I want to thank the state Senate in particular for the leadership that they've provided in starting to move us towards a more planned approach to building decarbonization. So, I heard that. So our charge at this point in the second phase of building decarbonization is to optimize the current market model with the big sticks and the big carrots and start to build out and clear the policy pathway for this adjacent market model so that we can go at scale. The 2020s are going to be messy. What we are charged with is getting ready for the next decade of climate change mitigation at scale. And so we need to work on building the types of systems and solutions that'll bring that about. There's no other room I'd rather be in when talking about these types of solutions. This is a room of leaders, elected leaders, appointed leaders, hired leaders, and volunteer leaders that set up the foundation for this movement that people across this country are now being able to benefit from. The first phase of building decarbonization was incredibly hard and really unprecedented, the scale and the speed of our successes. The next stage, we're going to have to go even faster and bigger, and it's going to be even harder. These are the moments when true leaders and communities stand up and change history. And I know that when we look back at how we were able to fight off the worst effects of climate change, we were able to look back about how we were able to build the systems and the solutions to be able to allow us to make this happen. We're going to look back at this decade and Silicon Valley and the leadership that you all provided to provide a path for everybody else to follow moving forward. So thank you for having me here today, and thank you for the leadership you continue to provide to the rest of us. They're not letting me leave. No, not yet. Yeah. I thought if I didn't bring PowerPoint, she would be able to.
No, thank you so much, Panama. I'm going to invite our chair, Tyson, to ask the first question. Going to allow maybe one or two more questions. If you have a question, please just go ahead and line up there.
Hello, Panama. I've been introduced already. What is the one most important thing local governments can do to advance electrification?
I'll give you two. Make back mud successful and everything you can do to support Backmud in their efforts. But I think in particularly focusing at the local level, it's preparing your community for this transition. And that's in a few different ways. I mentioned it about supporting the mom and pop shops, the installers that are in your community, that are really the heartbeat of this movement, and making sure that they know about all of the programs and the policies that are coming, so that they can begin to prepare to support the residents within your community. And the second part is your regulatory structures. There are opportunities at local governments to be able to cut through a lot of the permitting red tape that we may be facing around building electrification, to make building electrification actually easier to install than gas. And so I think really preparing your community through messaging, through partnerships with the installer community, and being able to eliminate any red tape that you can is going to be the most effective thing.
Director Walia.
Okay, stand on tiptoes. Thank you for your presentation, and I really appreciate you mentioning that this is the first year that the heat pumps have taken over more than the gas furnaces have sold. You also talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, billions and billions of dollars. I am thinking of a recent, maybe a few weeks old, New York Times article where they talked about the installation of the heat pumps has kind of slowed down because of the way the IRA credits are being rolled out. Average cost $16,000, supposed to be $8,000 credit, not happening till next year. Currently, what's really being given is about $2,000. So I just thought this is a great moment for us to get your wisdom and your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Sure. No fans of President Biden at the New York Times of late, by any means. I think the title of that article, the headline, I think, was something like Biden's heat pump policies like threatened by heat pumps or something like that. It was a terrible article. So the reason I hated that article, thank you for bringing it up, was because what it suggested was that heat pump sales are down as a result of the federal government approving billions of dollars to support heat pumps. And I couldn't quite follow that logic, but what I did follow was the link in the article to the data they were using. And so what they said is that heat pump sales are down 9%. And what they looked at in the article was this is because of inflation and interest rates right now. And a lot of people in the HVAC community right now are seeing a lot more replacements and installations. If you click on the link where that data source was from, they'll show that the air conditioning sales are down 14% and gas furnace sales were down 24%. And that's after 24% drop last year for gas furnace sales. And so yes, across the board, home improvement is down due to inflation and interest rates, but heat pumps are the best performing technology in the whole class of HVAC right now. And I really wish that the New York Times had actually told the rest of the story with that data source. The IRA is confusing to people. There's a tax credit that's available right now. The rebates won't be available in California until next year. And so it's going to be incumbent upon leaders like Silicon Valley Clean Energy and the representative communities to help provide a really clear message to their residents about what is and is not available and what they're eligible for. And so we would love to work with SVCE and the communities to help communicate to residents about that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one last question.
If you give long answers, you can avoid questions.
Hi, I'm Linda Swan, and I have a question. I own a condo in Arizona, and it uses a heat pump. And because the complex was built in 1969, when there was a natural gas shortage, so the whole complex is electric. So we've been using heat pumps down there forever. But my question is, we also had an electric water heater, and it went out, and I was interested in a heat pump. But I got 24 hours to get this installed. And so I kind of researched, I talked to Steve Schmidt, but I don't have 2 weeks to, find a heat pump and find somebody to check the electrical and do all this. It has to be done right away because people don't want to be without their water heaters for a month while they finally make this decision. So you talked about 6 million decisions, and this is one of them. How do you speed this up so that when somebody needs a water heater, they can quickly make that decision and make that transition?
I love that question. And just so you know, it was Linda, right? Just so you know, this is not just Linda's issue, but much broader. So 90% of water heating and space heating equipment is replaced on failure, right? Not many of us wake up and, you know what? No kids' soccer game today. I think I'm going to replace the old water heater. No, it's like this is usually only done in an emergency situation. And most installers have what they always sell on their truck, right? So if you can finally get the fourth plumber you called to come out, they're going to have that unit on their truck. So a couple answers to that. One, this neighborhood scale approach that I talked about is a way to get away from the urgency nature of installations and actually be able to plan for large scale installations. Proactive installations is going to be a key part of this. Two, I think we need to be, the mid-transition, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff that we'll never do again and we'll look back at and kind of laugh. But I think one of these things is we're likely going to need to be making some temporary installations in order to be able to make that transition. And so does somebody put a non-heat pump electric water heater into your condo to be able to bridge until a heat pump water heater can come? And how can we support installers? Again, supporting installers to be able to do some of this. Because if we're going to rely upon the emergency nature and people not having showers for 3 weeks, this whole movement's not going to work. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Panama. Great questions. As senators, our next session, we are very honored to have two of our state senators who have been leaders in climate policy. They will be coming up to stage. And I'd like to introduce our moderator, Benna Chang. Benna is our Director of Government and Legislative Policy at SVCE. I'd like to introduce Senator Cortese. He was elected in November 2020 to represent District 15, which encompasses much of Santa Clara County in the heart of Silicon Valley. Along with his accomplished career as an attorney and business owner, the senator previously served in the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors for over a decade with 4 years as board president. And while on the board, the senator served as a Silicon Valley Clean Energy board member from 2017 to 2018, right in these chambers. So part of our success is due to him. Senator Cortese continues to expand on the successful work he's done in Santa Clara County and works to apply as many solutions as possible statewide. That includes addressing climate change through building decarbonization. Let's also welcome Senator Josh Becker. Senator Becker is a public policy innovator working at the nexus of community activism, technology, and social justice. Elected to the state Senate in November 2020, Senator Becker represents the residents of California's 13th Senate District, which comprises the northern part of Santa Clara County and most of San Mateo County. The senator is the author of several bills focused on accelerating California's transition to 100% clean energy and net zero emissions. I can attest to the fact I've been on Zoom calls with him where he gets into the details. He's very innovative about pushing the envelope. Thank you very much. In addition to all that, he's also involved in voter access and justice reforms and leveraging technology to provide greater economic mobility for all Californians. Benna?
Great, thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here today to moderate this fireside chat with a real working electric fireplace. Thank you, Pam. But it's such an honor to have two of our state champions on climate issues here today. So I'm going to get started with a couple of questions before we open it up for audience Q&A. The first one really is courtesy of my colleague Jessamine, who sent around a wonderful video recently of President Obama's climate advisor, where she really talked about how it's not as effective to lead with fear and guilt when you're trying to motivate people to do the right thing on climate. What motivates people is actually hope and painting that picture of the end state, that vision that we're trying to get to at the end of the day. So would love to hear from both senators. What do you see as your vision? What is the state's vision on climate change and clean energy? Maybe we'll start with Senator Cortese first.
Well, it's tough to speak for the whole state, but and you'll probably see that in the conversation today, as much as Senator Becker and I are on the same page so often, and we end up on the same page. Things don't always start off that way, and we're working through constantly, even in the Democratic caucus, which is a supermajority in the Senate, and in the other house, we're constantly working through iterations of vision to try to get places. So to put that aside, just for a moment, I think all great movements that I'm old enough to have seen really regenerate. They're generational efforts, and the vision is something that really has to start with children. We started something called the Silicon Valley Kids Climate Club some years ago. The kids who we were talking to in classrooms, a couple thousand kids, as it turned out, ultimately, are about 20 years old now. Those kids will be about 42 years old if and when we hit our climate goals. But the question is, I connected personally by being a county supervisor, local official, and having access to classrooms because the principals, superintendents will let us in, right? They'll let us in to talk. Trying to go one classroom at a time, one child at a time. You have to. Two things have to happen. We have to scale that, like we did with tobacco. I mean, and to bring it back more on the environmental side, I was around when we went from no recycling to recycling to get our landfills down. That was kids, being taught in classrooms and in every other venue they were in. This is what you need to do. And they'd go home and say, Mom, Dad, this is what you need to do, or Mom or Dad, or whatever the case was in that household. Certainly that happened with tobacco. I'm old enough to have seen that firsthand. Mom, don't smoke. They told us that's bad at school. The pressure, we created an entire generation of really kind of superheroes, and we need to do that now. And one of the things I'm proud of is that we just funded, through the Budget Act, a significant amount of money for the Tech Interactive here, which brings in 100,000 kids a year, even now, post-pandemic, for interactive learning on field trips. Each and every one of them now will have an interactive climate experience when they come in. They'll be asked to make simple but profound pledges going forward on what they're going to do, to bring us forward. That's the broader vision that I have, that all these bills and everything that we're doing, we have to do right now because we're in an existential crisis. But if we don't catch this generation right now, I don't think we'll get there.
That's great. Well said. Senator Becker?
Yeah, well, that was a great example and success. First of all, yeah, it's fun to be here, see many friends and true believers. And you talked about 1979 in your thesis, I think it was. And I remember in 1991, I was working in Washington, and we were working with EPA, and we had the first Clean Air Marketplace conference. And it was the first time I saw an electric car. And I said, oh, these will be on the streets in no time, I'm sure. But, we have come a long way, right? Now it's 25% of the entire state of the new cars were electric. And in our region, it's closer to 50%. So when you talk about hope, I mean, there are hopeful numbers. That's why it's great to see Panama. I think always does a great job of that, of kind of exhorting us and setting those goals, but also, he's got the wonky details in how to get there. And I think we do need both. To have like a very Silicon Valley analogy, I worked at Netscape when it was the time when like Microsoft had sort of realized, okay, this browser is important, and they were sort of kind of gunning for Netscape. And like, as Jim Barksdale did a great job of like putting fear in us of Microsoft, but also hope that we could actually win. So it's that dual measure. I mean, and everyone here, of course, knows the consequences if we don't. But and the rest of the world, I think, is waking up to it a little bit. But to the point and to the question, we do have to have the hope that we can do it. And this is an area where success begets success. And we've seen it with EVs, because you can see an EV in your neighbor's driveway and say, "Oh, are you happy with that?" "Yeah, great. You should come, take a look." And we don't see those as much with electric homes, although I think increasingly we have, you can put the sign in front of your yard, "Hey, I've gone all electric." But this is an area very much where success begets success, and it gives people hope that we can do it.
That's great. Second question, how can local governments and CCAs help the state achieve the vision, help you guys achieve what you're looking for? Yeah, Senator Becker.
Well, I think Panama had some good suggestions, and I'll get back to what I said, right, where success begins success. I mean, one of the things that we can do is promote efforts that are happening in our cities. We're really lucky to represent forward-thinking cities who are trying really cool things, and CCAs like Silicon Valley Clean Energy. So we had a call recently. We talked to Monica, and we talked to the team, and heard about some of the new incentives that are being offered. So like, great, let's put that in our newsletter. I have a newsletter. It goes out to 200,000 people, and we'll put some of ours in San Mateo County, so we'll hopefully get some incentives there as well. But when you all are offering incentives, or if there's something going on, I was talking about electric. I was in Los Altos yesterday. They were talking about the electric home tour, and I said, "Oh, next year we should promote that electric home tour, so we get more people on there, so they can see what's possible, see what people are doing on the ground, and we are that model for the country in that way that Panama talked about when Berkeley and then all our cities here started doing all electric new building standards. And to think that 1 in 4 Americans now lives in a jurisdiction that has an all electric building standard, that's quite remarkable. But that all started here at a local level. So whatever we can do as he said, you prepare your community, and whatever we can do then to help promote that and use the positions that we have I think that's where it's a symbiotic relationship.
That's great. I think now we'd like to open it up for audience Q&A. Oh, sorry. Yes, please.
That's okay. Thank you. First of all, I think local government is where the action is and is going to be, and perhaps even more so. I mean, you got to look at, we're in a presidential election here. We don't have to hearken back too far to 2016. And when I went out with the Foundation for Climate Restoration for their convening at the UN the year before I joined the Senate, I was the only elected official there. It was a county elected official. There was no federal buy-in whatsoever on anything that was going on there. There really wasn't any federal buy-in on anything that was going on, for the next 4 years, other than shrink, investment in the kind of things we're talking about, like REACH codes and electrification and so forth. The state we get our share of gridlock too, although we're fighting the good fight and we're making progress. And Senator Becker is correct. There's plenty to celebrate and a lot of hope there, and I could give some examples. But we passed REACH codes here in Santa Clara County the year before I went to the Senate by putting it on the agenda on a Tuesday, voting, having the ordinance come back, and it's basically done, right? I know local governments here have done that. And that seems like, wow, are we going to get there? It's kind of like a fossil fuel death by 1,000 cuts. But I'll ask this way, what choice do we have? And it isn't, unheard of to stitch together major policy changes in this country, one town at a time, one city at a time, one county at a time. It happens, and counter resistance happens that way too. But you often have an easier time of it, local government. I know not everyone will, and not always, but the opposition that we see when we try to move statewide galvanizes quickly, It's effective, and it makes it very, very difficult for us to do what you would like to see us do. Oftentimes broad sweeping change all at once. So I went to the Senate. They told us, we came in at the same time. They said, hey, December 7th. Imagine that. Now we haven't even convened for the January session officially. They told us you could introduce your first set of bills. So I introduced 3 building decarbonization bills, basically 3 climate bills. But one of them was, I told my staff, which was one person, we hadn't even staffed up yet, hey, look, I want to run a bill and do just what we did in Santa Clara County statewide. Why not? Let's replicate, the good work that's being done down here. The opposition letter came out fiercely inside of a week, on that bill. I won't get into the details of the other ones. So we need to keep working on that, right? We don't give up. We keep pushing. We keep doing variations, and we keep trying to take the opposition off, figure out what they want. Like Panama was talking about, there have been successes in that regard. But take it as a compliment or take it as, work. But I really believe local government and local agencies need to be all in and need to be just as aggressive as anything you'd expect from us, and try to move just as quickly, and try to move forward, if not in unanimity, through your mayor's conferences and cities associations and whatnot. But if you can't do that, at least move individually with the best version of what you can do, because there's just no assurance we're going to get that out of Washington or even the state of California. We did this year pass SB 740, one of my bills, and with 4 joint authors, Senator Gonzalez, Senator Durazo, Senator Small-Cuevas, and myself, Senate Bill 150, which was, both of those were labor standards and equity playing offense in this area, in this space, saying, look, this stuff is coming, green energy is coming. We have emerging industries coming forward. We have to tackle lithium batteries. You did it last year, and we have to keep tackling that. They're coming. Do we want to create poverty there? Do we want to create $14 an hour jobs, or do we want to do this right going forward? That's what the unions are asking, right? They're saying, we know it's coming and we want it, but include us and include our working standards and include our workforce standards and include equity. Don't just go to a place like the Salton Sea because you think labor's real cheap down there, and do that kind of manufacturing, and that part. Not all of you can't do, local governments. We have to do that, but to do that, we have to create these partnerships going forward and really challenge our labor partners. I chair the Senate Labor Committee. I've been doing it. I challenge them, to use sort of a football analogy, to throw the long ball, play offense. Don't just try to kill bills. Come in on the offensive side and say, we want to be part of the team that's trying to move the ball down the field. That has to happen.
It's great, very important work. The challenge is so large that we do need a big coalition to get to our goals. So now, time for Q&A.
Thank you. I'd like to invite
Please.
Vice Chair Valia.
Thank you, Senator Cortese and Senator Becker, for all the work you do in the state. And on behalf of the elected officials who are here, may I just thank you for the compliments you are giving to the local government officials here. Deeply appreciate that. So my question is, given some of the challenges you referred to, and adding the big $68 billion state budget deficit that we are looking at the projection at least, what do you think are the major challenges and opportunities for the coming legislative year, especially in the areas of building electrification and the climate issues that you're both so passionately working in?
Let me try to give a quick response and then turn over to Senator Becker. I would just say this, the good news is, despite what you see with $60 billion over the next 3 years that we have to find in the budget, remember $54 billion went out 2 years ago, the year before last, and then last year $14 billion in infrastructure that we put climate and equity standards on going out. So we don't necessarily have to go back and have people tell us there's no money for this, or you can't stand up a new program because there's no money for it. The good news is what we're trying to do now is, as dollars go out through the agencies, through these executive branch agencies, to in some sense catch up and make sure we're directing it properly, or we're attaching and bootstrapping still things onto it that we can to maybe accomplish some of what you heard from the first speaker. Senator?
Yeah, I'd say two things. One is that some of the things don't require money, right? Like building standards. So the more that we can do in that way, the better. And we've already done a lot, but there's a lot more to do there. And also, when I look at things like that Silicon Valley Clean Energy has been doing, like educating contractors, that doesn't require a lot of money. On-bill financing, just making it easier for, and where Silicon Valley Clean Energy has really been a leader in that, and I was happy to work on that and do a bill in that space. But that's about freeing up lots of money, and just making it easier, right? We get the time value of money and working for people, and we saw the power of that with solar. So there's other things like that. Also encouraging entrepreneurship and encouraging new technologies. So making sure that the state is a buyer of these technologies. Write a bill to get our state to net zero by 2035, 10 years ahead of the rest of the rest of the state, but for our own operations, so our fleet, our vehicles, our fleet, our buildings, our energy, and have the state purchase a lot of these new technologies. So there's things that we can do. Now, I do chair the budget subcommittee that is for energy and environment, and we are going to have to play defense in areas, but we're also working on a bond. That'll be anywhere, hopefully, between $5 billion and $15 billion. That will be a resources bond, but we're also trying to put some clean energy in there so we can do some of the build out in the bond, so it doesn't fall on ratepayers at the end of the day to do that. So we have a bond. This is once in a I don't know once in a generation, but it's something we do once every 10 to 15 years. Really have the opportunity. What goes in the bond? So we're trying to advocate. So there are things we can do. It is going to be difficult in some areas, but there's still a lot more we can still do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I got the signal that we have time for one more question, so I apologize. I know there's two questions. Lightning round. Okay. Great. All right. Yeah, if you guys are willing to do lightning round, that would be great too. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Hi, I'm Linda Hutchins-Knowles with Mothers Out Front and the EV Charging for All Coalition. I appreciated your shout out about building codes. We're really happy that the HCD has adopted a building code or proposed it. That's going to be 100% of new apartments and condos will get EV ready charging, which is the first state to go to that. So I'm really proud of our coalition for helping that. We want to see the CEC do the same with all electric buildings, and right now they're on track to have a second appliance be all electric, but they're not touching gas stoves. And so I wonder, two questions. One is about how you can support this effort, because as a mother of a child with asthma, it's not just the climate impacts we're worried about it, but the health impacts of growing up at home with gas stove. And so one question is on that, and the other is having an equity lens on this, knowing that low-income communities and renters have a much harder time electrifying. They'll be the last ones on the gas system paying exorbitant prices. How can the state support this to be equitable so everybody can participate, electrifying quickly and equitably?
Well, on the first front, we can help with the agency. We try to help influence the agency. Certainly on the building code, spent a lot of time on that issue, and we did legislation, and some of it got vetoed, but we kind of kept moving the ball forward and help put pressure, hopefully. And we can do that in this as well. And we've got good people at the CC, but we have to keep pushing, and the coalition certainly helps. In terms of the, I forgot the second question again. The second question again was the equity center. Yeah. I mean, we've really tried with the budget that we put out to really focus, especially on charging, for example, charging infrastructure in low-income neighborhoods. How can we expect people to get EVs? Again, hopefully they'll be able to charge if you're a multifamily, but a lot of that's been built already. We have to retrofit that. We need charging available in those communities. We need to make sure the incentives are there for people. Many communities didn't need air conditioners many years ago, and many low-income communities still don't have them. And now, we know the heat's getting oppressive. And so if we can get them a heat pump, then they'll also have a higher quality of life as well. So we're certainly working on that we really focused on that with the funding last year, but we have to keep working.
Senator Cortese, yeah.
Yeah, we did. I think the two of us supported the legislation that you're referring to, and happy to do so. I know we're trying to be hopeful today. I mean, the big challenge is retrofit. I mean, think about it. I mean, everything from getting easements and access into private property. The vast majority, I forget what the percentage is today, even in this county, of multifamily was built years ago. It's privately owned. You have to get in there. The challenge really, in terms of, we can put targets and goals out there all we want, like 2035, but we're going to cap the market if people can't get beyond the 25% now because they can't charge because the infrastructure is not there. And then on the poverty issue, we ran a bill a couple of years ago, I don't remember the number now, which met fierce opposition, but it was to require the investor-owned utilities to come into existing multifamily. This isn't on REACH, but this is on solar, and zero out the electric bill for each one of those tenants before they return ROI, back. And the metrics are all there, the numbers are all there. Analytically wasn't what the opposition was. The opposition was coming from, frankly, from solar installers who were primarily low-wage installers who didn't want to see a big sweeping effort like that happen over a few years, right? Because an IOU can do that. And it was easy to get the unions behind that one because the investor-owned utilities would have first option to send their own workers in, which are all unionized. But, Bill, some of those kinds of bills, you've seen them. They get 8/10 of the way, 9/10 of the way through the process, and then they disappear in appropriations or somewhere.
I just wanted to thank you both for your leadership on that bill, because even though it passed the Senate, the governor did veto it, but it still put the pressure on the agencies who did the right thing. So thank you.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Wonderful conversation. Yes.
Thank you.
Can I just say that I have my team meeting, my capital team's down, so I won't be able to stay for dinner, but it's wonderful to see all of you. And then it's wonderful to read through the successes. I mean, it's only a dream, right? That we had years ago, but we had to beg PG&E to do stuff. And now you look at all that's been accomplished, and it's really tremendous. So thanks all of you.
Thank you. I want to thank you as a former board member. They used to always call me a charter board member because we kind of started Silicon Valley Clean Energy when I was on the Board of Supervisors with the board finally coming in and getting behind, the fiscal tag on this, if you will. But thank you. It's great to be back here again. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Benna, for facilitating that conversation. And thank you, Senators Becker and Cortese. We're very fortunate in Silicon Valley, in this county, to have you both representing us. So thank you very much for your time and leadership. So we are going to take 3 minutes to do something a little different. We're going to show you a video. And so feel free to stand up and stretch your legs while you're doing that. And then we'll get prepared for our next speaker, Arne Olson.
California is transitioning to a cleaner electric grid, and this new clean energy resource is a welcome addition to the resource fleet.
I recommended the Future Fit course to some of my coworkers. Actually, I've put it on the bulletin board because it helps drive out more business, know more ways to electrify, and to help reduce the carbon footprint.
I have a pretty erratic schedule and I do a lot of night shifts. And so nowadays I'm not charging at night and I have to figure out when to charge during the day. So with the app, I don't have to worry about figuring it out.
I would absolutely encourage others to electrify and take advantage of all the resources and rebates available to help them through the process.
I think most people would like to try to do something for the environment, but if it's going to cost them a lot of money, it makes it tough. But between the tax rebates and the Silicon Valley clean energy rebates, these things are affordable, very affordable.
Argus was such a strong candidate for the decarbonization grant because we were taking existing old gas-fed furnaces that make a larger impact on the carbon footprint and went towards a more energy efficient, greener approach with all-electric barred heat pumps in the classrooms.
That was great. Thank you so much. Marketing and communications team at SVCE is amazing. So welcome back, everyone. It was really great to hear from Panama. Very inspirational, really connecting all of us to what we can do locally. And we're right in the middle of this transition, so that was amazing. It's great to hear from our senators. And also, it's like at the local level, we can really take action. And the kind of goals we have are really ambitious. We talked about buildings and transportation. So I want to introduce our next speaker, Arne Olson, who's a senior partner at a company called E3, or Energy and Environmental Economics. I like to say that they're a blue chip company in California. I'm not talking about what they charge. They don't charge blue chip rates. It's blue chip quality. I always love reading their reports. So Arne leads E3's bulk energy infrastructure practice, helping clients navigate changes to the bulk electric system operations and investment needs brought about by increasing policy and market interest in clean and renewable energy production. He has led a number of landmark studies of the feasibility and cost of achieving deep decarbonization and high renewable penetration goals for electric utilities, including studies of 100% renewable and net zero energy systems in New England, California, the Pacific Northwest, and the Midwest. Arne has 25 years of experience in energy analysis, and he's a frequent speaker at energy conferences on the role renewable energy will play in decarbonizing the grid. I know our board is very interested in this. A clean grid is the beginning for all this transformation. So Arne, welcome.
Well, thank you, Girish, for that kind introduction and for the invitation to come down and speak to you tonight. This feels like a great party. It really does. I'm not sure if it's the holiday decorations, the band that was coming in, everyone's in just such a good mood, and that's fantastic. It's really a great atmosphere. I'm a math guy, and so when I look out at our clean energy futures and I run the math, I often come up with, well, gosh, this is going to be hard. There's a challenge here. We don't quite know how to do that. And I'm often asked to talk about the challenges that we face ahead. And I didn't quite realize that this was going to be such a great party. So I'm sorry. I'm going to be that guy at the party that's here to sober you up a little bit after all the inspirational talk we just heard. But at the same time, I want to emphasize, and I will throughout my talk, that we know how to do a lot of this. And so even though I'm going to talk about the challenges, I'm going to also emphasize the things that we do know how to do and the steps that we can take to make those come about. So most of the work that I'm going to talk about, or most of the subject that I'm going to talk about today stems from the work that E3 does with the state of California, both with the Air Resources Board, looking at the long-term economy-wide decarbonization pathways, and within for the Public Utility Commission within the Integrated Resource Planning proceeding, and some work we've done for the Energy Commission as well. Although we do work across the country, as Girish mentioned, so I can answer questions about other areas as well. I'm going to start off with what do we need to do to get to 2045 to reach our economy-wide goals for California. We always come back to the 4 pillars. 4 pillars are more energy efficiency than we ever have done before, electrification of transportation, buildings, as we heard about, some industry, as much as we can do, swapping out our fossil fuel-based electricity sources with clean sources everywhere we can, and for whatever fuel demand we still have left, swapping in low-carbon fuels as much as we can. These are kind of the 4 things. We know how to do a lot of these things, but these are the 4 general thrusts that we have to accomplish to reach our sort of long-term goals. Now, what all of these lead to is the electricity sector being the linchpin of the transition. The electric utilities with the distribution infrastructure and the CCAs and others that are procuring the clean energy resources that are going to lead us into the future. This is your job, this is your role to help lead the economy and help clean electricity displace fossil fuels as the primary source of energy for our economy. And if you think about how much energy from fossil fuels we consume, you know what a Herculean task that is. That's what we have ahead of us. So just to chart this out a little bit over time, this is a chart of our greenhouse gas emissions in California starting in 2020, looking ahead to our 2045 goals. To make some of those 4 pillars come about, we need lots of implementing policies. So it's easy to do studies, it's easy to pass goals, but there's a lot of hard work ahead of us in terms of how to actually make this happen. And so we're starting now with ramping up of sales of electric vehicles and building appliances. I'm not sure I share Dr. Grubert's perspective that we're in mid-transition. I feel like we're a little bit more towards the beginning of that transition. But if you think of the transition as taking the shape of an S-curve, where it starts off relatively slow, and then it starts to pick up momentum, and then it gets steep, and then as you accomplish most of it, it starts to taper back off again. The good news is that once you get onto that steep part of the curve, the transition is going to happen much, much faster. And we here in California are pioneering that kind of flat part of the curve and bringing these technologies up the learning curve and into the marketplace. But what we'll need to do to meet our goals in California, by 2030, doubling energy efficiency in buildings, 60% renewable electricity generation. By 2035, 100% of our new light-duty vehicles will need to be some electric vehicles, and 90-something% of our heavy-duty vehicles will need to be some form of zero-emission vehicle, whether it's hydrogen or some other kind of fuel, or electric, which increasingly looks like it's the answer. By 2040, 100% of our electricity will come from zero-carbon sources. And then things that we're a little farther away from in terms of implementing policy. By 2035, 100% of new furnaces are heat pumps. And this is important to reach this goal early because these are technologies that have a long lifetime, and the stock rollover makes it really important to start early to get to a 2050 goal. By 2045, 90 to 100% of the remaining fossil fuel use displaced with biofuels, hydrogen, synthetic fuels. We've made deep inroads into industry, and even that doesn't get us all the way to zero. You have to have some form of carbon dioxide removal, whether that's forestry, land, or carbon capture, direct air capture, and underground sequestration to get all the way down to net zero. So lots of work ahead of us. The good news is we're starting to get onto the steep part of the S-curve with electric vehicles. And we're seeing this around the world. 10 million electric vehicles were sold in 2022. The global sales of vehicles are 60 to 70 million. So this is a real number. We're making real inroads. And a lot of this is happening outside the US. The US isn't necessarily leading on the EV transition. That's good. Maybe the rest of the world will drag us along even as we're dragging our feet. There is a lot of infrastructure that we need to build to make room for these electric vehicles. And I'm a little worried that our industry doesn't move fast enough to build out all the charging infrastructure, all the distribution and transmission that's needed to make sure that as people adopt these vehicles, which they want to do, that they're not frustrated with the lack of ability to charge them. With respect to our electricity supply, this is kind of one vision of what that might look like. This comes from the PUC's IRP process, which you're probably familiar with. The colors on the chart, the yellow is solar, the purple is batteries, and that's what our future mostly looks like in California, just because those are the resources that we have easily accessible and available to us. And they're a good match still for our summertime load shape. The blue towards the bottom is wind, the red is geothermal. As much of that as we can get, that's helpful, because that's a diverse source of energy that produces even at night when the sun's not shining and even in the wintertime. We don't have a lot of access to good wind in California, so it's making use of the marginal wind that we have and looking for other sources out of state, offshore, building out the transmission that's needed to get there. I just want to focus your attention a little bit on the magnitude of what we have to accomplish over the next 12 years. That's about 90 gigawatts of new resources. These are new resources over and above what we have today. Today we have about 30 gigawatts of solar between utility scale and rooftops, 10 gigawatts of wind, so it's a lot to do. This is coming at a time when we're facing increased demand, both from onshoring of industrial demand and climate adaptation as well. We're seeing, changing climate is really leading to uncertainty about how much load we have to serve. It's leading to droughts and other challenges that we're facing, even over and above the challenge that we have to clean up the electricity sector. And just to give you a little bit of flavor of what we're already seeing, and I know that people are experiencing that in their real lives, and so this won't come as a surprise, but I want to spend a little bit of time on that September 6th of 2022 event, because it's the one that's going to be seared in electricity planners' minds for a long time, at least until the next one comes along. But just to give you a sense of how extreme the heat was on that day, on the bottom left is the Energy Commission's forecast of the peak load for the CAISO system. Their median forecast, 1 and 2 forecast, was 46 gigawatts. So that's what you would expect the peak to be, above that half the time, below that half the time. The 1 in 10 peak would have, according to their forecast, was 49.4 gigawatts. The 1 in 20 peak was 50.1 gigawatts. What we actually hit that day was 51.4 gigawatts of electric load, so way above what they expected to be even the 1 in 20 peak. And that's due, I think, mostly to the temperature. It may be a little bit to increased adoption of electric devices, that leads to higher electric use during those time periods. And I want to note that 51.4 is net of rooftop solar. If you account for rooftop solar's production during the peak, our peak would have been about 58 gigawatts on that day. And if you think about what our actual highest peak was back in 2006, it was a little bit below 51, so around 50, and that's before we had much rooftop solar online. So that's how much our electricity system has changed, how much our demand has grown over that time period. Now I want to look at what resources were helping us keep the lights on that day. So as much progress as we've made in California, and we've made a lot. We know how to clean up our electricity sector, and we're doing a lot of it. We have, about 60% of our electricity is generated today from some clean source, whether it's wind, solar, hydro, or nuclear, about 40% gas remaining. But with all of that, what was keeping the lights on during the most critical hour on that day is listed on the chart on the right there. So, the most critical hour was shortly after sundown. So solar was producing very little, about a gigawatt. Now wind picked up just a little bit around 5 o'clock. So we had 2 gigawatts of wind on that hour. We had about 8 gigawatts of imports, about 5 gigawatts of hydro, but about 26 gigawatts of natural gas. We really had most, if not all, the natural gas fleet firing up and helping to keep the lights on that day. So for as much progress as we've made, those are the resources that we still are relying on to help keep the lights on during these most critical times. And that's just a reality that we have to recognize. Panama talked about standing up the new infrastructure, while at the same time that we're phasing out the old infrastructure. That is the task ahead of us. But we still are reliant on the old infrastructure to deliver energy when we need it and where we need it, and we have to make sure that it's able to do that job as we're making that transition. Now, you might ask, what does this picture look like in 2050 after we've made the transition? If we're still relying on wind and solar for the bulk of our clean electricity, which I think we will be, the picture might look something like this. This is a chart of the energy balance throughout the year, week by week. on a system that has that's fully transformed. It has 93 gigawatts of demand because we have all of this electric vehicles, electric heat pumps. This is a 2050 full compliance scenario. 90% carbon-free generation, including 150 gigawatts of solar PV, 20 gigawatts of wind, 75 gigawatts of energy storage. And you can see throughout the year, you have more energy than you need most of the time. And we even have more, and we're even curtailing. What that red is curtailing energy during, really many weeks out of the year. But there are a few weeks where we come a little bit short. And those are mostly during the winter time. We now are using electricity to heat our buildings, and we're relying on solar, and the sun just doesn't shine as much in the winter as it does during the summer. And we end up with these multi-day events where maybe there's a tule fog, and people do need to use their heaters. And so some weeks we end up short. And if you kind of zero in on what one of those weeks look like, you can still see there's a lot of solar, and even during the middle of the day in December, you have more solar than you need, but you don't have enough to charge all the batteries that you would need to get through the night. And so even on this system, we're reliant on some type of peaking resource to help keep the lights on throughout in that sort of cold, dark winter week. And if we don't have a clean technology, natural gas can still play this role, but we would like to move beyond that. And so in order to do that, we'll need some new form of technology, some new clean, firm type of a resource. And these are what those candidates might look like. Maybe you burn the gas, but you capture the carbon and you bury it underground. Maybe you've got nuclear, enhanced geothermal could provide round-the-clock power, very long duration energy storage. There's lots of interesting new technologies out there now that can store electricity for multiple days, maybe even weeks. Or maybe it's something like hydrogen, and there's lots of interest in hydrogen now to help us solve this problem. But we need one or more of these technologies if we really want to take our grid all the way to zero carbon. So with that, I will thank you, and hopefully there's some time for questions.
Thank you, Arne. We have our first question. One of our board members and mayor of the city of Montecito, Brian Makichek.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. The numbers are kind of disturbing, and if you think generation, transmission, distribution, we at Silicon Valley Clean Energy are doing our best to find clean energy, and it's getting harder to find. And one of the problems appears to be in the transmission, and that's a bottleneck. How do you recommend that the state address the transmission issue? That's the first part. And then the second question is there anything that we can do about the transmission issue?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And you might be seeing reports kind of nationwide about, we need to build out transmission to help with resilience, and, in the face of Winter Storm Uri, we need to build transmission to help bring wind from the Great Plains to the Northeast, to the Atlantic coast. It's a real challenge. We're not used to building big infrastructure like that in this country, and it's harder. People are care about every square inch of ground in this country these days, and for good reasons. So it is a real challenge, and we need to figure out some solutions to it. But I think that we will. And I think in California in particular, you can see that a lot of what we have to build is solar. The good news about solar is it's pretty good almost everywhere in California. So we don't really have to find, that one spot in the desert where the insulation is 10% better than, where it is in the Central Valley. I think we can build a lot of that stuff in places where it's convenient for the transmission system. And I'm kind of reminded of, we heard a lot of this talk 10 years ago when we were first setting out to do 33% RPS and 50% RPS, and the queues were getting longer and longer because there was so much interest from the developer community, and they found sites and they wanted to get those sites built out. And we did things then. We implemented cluster studies to help avoid the kind of project by project backlog. We did things like READY, the Renewable Energy Transmission Initiative, where we identified transmission lines kind of sort of in advance that might be helpful to integrate various types of renewables. So I think there are solutions out there. Part of the reason why the queue is so long is because there's so many projects that people are developing, that they found sites for, and that they're interested in developing. But I guess the other thing I'll mention is that we do have an issue with permitting in California, that we have kind of two bites at the apple. So the ISO goes through a whole process to identify which transmission lines are needed to integrate the resources that are identified in the PUC's IRP process. But then the project proponent has to go to the PUC and get a permit to build the line. And the PUC's permitting staff then gets to redetermine whether that line really is needed, sort of doing the ISO's work all over again. So I think there is an issue there that, and I know there's been some legislation that was run last time to maybe address that specific issue. So I think that's a way that we can really help streamline the process and maybe just figure out once whether we need the line or not.
Great, thank you.
Have more questions? Don Bray. And that would be the last question for Arne, and then we'll move to the next speaker.
Yeah, interested in what role you think demand flexibility can play in this equation through, say, real-time hourly rates, VPPs, those sorts of things. Can they make a difference in this, and to what extent?
Yeah, I think it can. And I think it's going to be really important, especially as we think about how flexible electrical vehicle load could be, and how much of a challenge it could be if it's not made flexible. So I think that's what's going to drive us first to reform our retail rates to make sure that that people aren't charging their cars when it's convenient for them, if that's causing big challenges for the grid. There are many other types of loads that can also be flexible, and I think they'll be able to ride along on the coattails of that to some extent. The more we get into automation, AI types of things will help customers be able to respond to price signals in a way where they don't have to go and turn the lights down themselves. Something will do it for them. So I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to do a lot more of that in the future. But it might look a little different than it has in the past. In the past, we've mostly been trying to get people to reduce energy during the peak. You can see our peak is no longer a problem. 2 p.m. we're fine. It's 6 p.m. is when we have the challenge, and so the time when we need people to move is going to shift a little bit. And we're also going to start trying to encourage them to consume more during times when we have excess solar. As kind of and maybe EVs fit right into that, because can you charge when we have excess solar, please, and not at night when we have to turn on the gas resources to meet that need. Last thing I'll mention is we're about to build a whole lot of battery storage on the bulk side. So that is going to, I think, change the dynamic a little bit, the value proposition for customer flexibility. It's almost about more like how much bulk side storage can we avoid building if we can do the flexibility cheaper on the demand side.
Right. That was very insightful. Thank you very much, Arne.
Thank you.
So much. All right, now to bring it all home, no pressure, our final speaker, I'm pleased to welcome and introduce Beth Vaughan, who is the Executive Director of California Community Choice Association, to give us a broader view of CCAs like SVCE in the state's energy transition. CalCCA supports the state's CCAs through regulatory and legislative advocacy, technical guidance, and promotion of best practices. She has extensive policy experience working with government agencies, nonprofits, the private sector interests on innovative solutions to complex energy, climate, and environmental issues. Beth served 5 years as Senior Advisor to Environment and Conservation Cabinet Ministers in the New Zealand Parliament. She has served in California, being an advisor to various industry groups for many years. And something Beth does that none of us can do, she doesn't sleep. So she just works. It's amazing what she's able to do. And just like our growth, CalCCA's growth, she's pulled together an amazing team. We really can't be very effective in the policy space without Beth and her team. So Beth, please.
Great. Well, thank you, Director Balatondran. We have a board meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m., so I won't be sleeping between now and then. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. And I've been asked to talk about the CCA role and impact. I also, because I'm the last speaker, I'm the sweeper, my job is to correct anything I disagree, Panama's gone, I can say anything I want, or anything I disagree with Arne about. And Arne and I mostly disagree about the colors he uses for his resource types in his graphs. Someday we'll get our shades correct. Okay, well, I thought I'd begin with a map that I assume most people have seen. Today is the last day of this map. We will not be seeing this one again. You're the last group I'm presenting to in 2023. We replace it at the beginning of January every year because our CCAs will be filing implementation plans prior to the end of this month. And what I can tell you here is you can see the timeline of the launch. On the right side, on the left, is the map of the locations. And we are constantly growing. So we have 25 community choice aggregators serving customers in California. The last one to launch was in 2022. It was Epic in Palmdale. And since then, we have no new CCAs, but we have CCAs that expand constantly. So what that means is that, for a few stats here, we have CCAs are in 213 communities in California. 20 out of the 58 counties are CCA, and 193 out of 462 cities. So that's 42%. So when the senators today mentioned, I think it was Senator Cortese was talking about it's really local government is where the action is, well, that's where the CCAs are. So hats off to all of you because that's what makes a difference. Now, when we think about from an energy perspective, collectively, it's about 60 gigawatt hours. So to put that in plain English, it's hard to put in plain English because there's so many different metrics here. But when I think of the independent system operator, the grid, CCAs schedule about 30% of the load into that grid. So that's really significant. And as I always say, with great market share comes great responsibility. So that means that we don't just look at things in our own part of the state, but we look outside of this, we look to the state goals and how we can contribute to those. And as I'll mention in a moment, we're actually looking beyond California as well. Okay, so as Grish mentioned, my world is policy, and it's great job security. All they do, I think these different government agencies, is create more cases, more stakeholder initiatives, more proceedings that we have to get involved in. And I've taken them all. We're in over 50 cases, CalCCA, on behalf of the CCAs. I grouped them into procurement, reliability, rates, and finance at the moment for the core policy issues. The state has had a major focus on procurement and reliability. And certainly when you think about Arne's discussion around heat waves and the fear of blackouts, that's where the focus is. And there's a whole litany of acronyms in there about all the different things that we're involved in on that stage. But again, when I think about our role, it's participating in all of these areas, but we're also doing it, again, for our customers, because CCAs represent the customers. All right. How many of you have seen this announcement? We do an annual announcement first week of November every year around the PPAs. Benna, you get a gold star. Pamela, all right. The website's there. I recommend go have a link or sign up for our distribution list. I can tell you that this year, in the first 30 minutes, we had 1,000 hits. So again, when you talk about our role and our impact, more and more, they know it's coming. The Public Utilities Commission, I can't tell you how many hits were from the PUC. So we have a press release, we have a map showing all the locations of where the power purchase agreements are that the CCAs do. That spreadsheet has 302 PPAs that the CCAs have signed since inception. And then there's my beautiful graph at the bottom, which has some colors that are kind of similar to yours. Again, you can download, there's glossies, but the numbers are the big ones, right? We're up to almost 14 gigawatts of renewables and energy storage that CCAs have executed power purchase agreements for. Those are now installed and becoming operational, and in the little video you saw, lots of ribbon cutting. I love going to ribbon cuttings with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Thank you for having me along. But look at that number, $25 billion of investment. And of course, the support for all of the jobs that go along with that. All right, so that was our announcement on November 2nd of 2023, and it's very specific. It's about long-term contracts, because we were challenged. Back in 2017, I was told we wouldn't do it. And these are contracts that are greater than 10 years. All right, 4 days later, the CPUC published their own report, and what they were reporting on, it's a compliance report for procurement orders that all the load-serving entities have to comply with, the CCA, Silicon Valley Clean Energy being one of them, and they were reporting progress towards state goals. Now, my last graph, the data was current to September 30th of 2023. They put out on November 6th data that's current to February of 2023, so already out of date. And the reason I'm showing it to you, the only reason, you don't have to look at all the acronyms and stuff, is the second bullet from the bottom, which says CCAs are the only load-serving entities to have reported procurement, and we're reporting procurement on LLT, which is long lead time resources. Those are the types of resources that Arne spoke about that are the firm, clean resources like long-duration storage, like geothermal, that we're actually going to need on the grid in order to achieve our long-term goals and have reliability. So, impact and rule, that's what we're doing, you guys. And I've got 1 minute, so watch how fast I can do this. I'm not gonna, all right, we won't get into this, but one of the things we did at CalCCA is a year ago, we saw the problem with the resource adequacy market. All I'm gonna say here is, again, go to our website. We've got a white paper that we started a year ago, all public data. We met with folks like EAT3, like the ISO, like commissioners, the investor-owned utilities. We said, tell us we're wrong, but this market is impossible. We're gonna have a hard time out to 2026 of complying. And that means prices go up. Prices go up, what does that do to the customer again, right? We need to really change the lens of this discussion into the lens of affordability. So I'm gonna skip through that. I'll let Monica ask me questions. Instead, I'm gonna flip to my very last slide and just say, how many in the room came to our conference in May in San Diego? Okay. Well, this year, it's right around the corner, folks. It's at the Signia Hotel, AKA the Fairmont Hotel in San Jose. And we are crowdsourcing topics now. So I'm gonna stay around for the reception. If you have any ideas, especially I'm looking at the elected officials, the board members here. We did have a luncheon, but we would love to put on workshops or invite speakers. So I'm really looking to all of you to get better ideas about this. Again, what we hope to do in 2024, I did a quick look back, and just some highlights for you, but what we were looking towards is trying to change this conversation up. We want to look more at the customer. We want to focus in on your customers that you have here. And then lastly, you'll notice that nothing in my presentation touched on programs, and that's deliberate. It's so that you invite me back, and I'll talk about it next time. All right, thank you very much.
So Monica Padilla with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Beth, what are the biggest threats and opportunities facing CCAs? And what should we be doing to ensure that we continue to grow and be successful?
Okay, so when I first came on in 2017 and I interviewed the 8 directors on my board and asked, what are the biggest threats? Number 1, number 2, and number 3 were all power charge and difference adjustment, right? The PCIA. That's not the case now. It could be if things flip. At the moment, things are pretty stable in that area. But right now, when I look at what's immediately in front of us, I think about resource adequacy and how compliance, non-compliance with resource adequacy can stop expansions. That's this brand new rule that got made up this year. So what do we do about it? Well, first of all, comply. Maybe that's the easy route. The second one is we are challenging the decision, and we'll be taking that to the Court of Appeal. The other thing is, all of you might know there's a ballot initiative in 2024, right? That's been brought. It could call into question whether rates are taxes, and that has much broader impacts than just the CCA rates, which I can see local electeds here nodding. The other thing, the big thing, being that I touched on procurement, it's project delays, right? The only way we're going to bring down some of those prices is to get all of these amazing projects that you've procured for, get them online and get them delivering. That's the key here. So that worries me, and that's, of course, a whole nother talk that Arne and I do in other places. In terms of opportunities, I'm going to throw one out here that I think is really cool this year. So as I mentioned, our focus has been very much California, building the CCAs, building up CalCCA block by block. This is the first year, and it really started with thinking about resource adequacy and the fact that this is much bigger than us. It's the west-wide. We're facing droughts. We're facing the impact of climate change. And there has been many initiatives to talk about regional coordination, not regionalization. I'm talking about regional coordination. And how do you organize around that? Holden's bill that he brought back got shelved again, Assemblymember Holden, Chris Holden, in June. And July 14th, a group of utility commissioners wrote a letter saying, we need to do something here. What could we do? And I'll just cut to the chase. Our board at CalCCA had been getting themselves very well educated on this issue over the past 6 months. We had speakers in from other states, from RAP, Sarah Edmonds, the Western Resource Adequacy Program, because all the resource adequacy here in the state might not stay here. It might get contracted out, so the prices could get even tighter and higher. So we should look outside of ourselves. We're very involved, again, with the board's blessing and guidance, and we're actually at the point where, bizarrely, CalCCA is co-chairing one of the working groups that's looking at these various options. So in terms of, again, our role and our impact, I think that we are engaging now with commissioners across the West. I think this has helped a lot in terms of our being seen as thought leaders and problem solvers. And all of that is all because of you, right? The subject matter experts, the CCA staff, and their governing boards are the ones that make that possible. So that's been an amazing opportunity to answer your question. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you very much, Beth.
Thank you.
Right, I want to thank all our speakers, our board, all our guests, as well as our staff for a great evening so far. You'll all notice at your tables you have some really nice centerpieces. Okay. If anyone at the table has a heat pump water heater, you get to keep it. However, if more than one has it, who installed it earlier? Okay? But don't worry, James, Steve, there may be some extras on other tables. You guys are leaders, so all good. And then the buffet is open. There's some past appetizers, so head to the buffet, but we'll also be passing appetizers around here. We're going to have some music, and at around 6:30 or so, about 6:30, we'll start breaking down this room to get ourselves set up for our board meeting, which takes place here at 7 o'clock. I just want to call out, there's so many staff who really worked very hard on this to put this event together. Want special attention for Pam. She did an amazing job. Yeah, so many things we did for the first time this year, so thank you very much. All right, thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of the evening.